Who gave you permission to touch my daughter? Elliot Graham's roar shook the hallway, echoing off the marble floors of the West Wing like a crack of thunder. He stormed into the medical room just as Brenda Jackson jerked her hand back from the trembling little girl in the bed. Just moments earlier, Lila, the eldest of his 7-year-old triplets, had woken from a nightmare with a scream so sharp it sliced through the quiet of the house. Her tiny body shook violently, her thin fingers clawing at her blanket as if trying to escape something terrible only she could see. "Mommy, Mommy, don't leave," she choked, her voice cracking. Brenda had rushed to her side faster than the nearest nurse, cupping the girl's face gently, whispering, "Sweetheart, you're safe. You're right here. Breathe with me. That's it. I've got you." Lila's cries softened, her trembling easing. Brenda brushed the damp tears from her cheeks and hummed a soft tune, rocking her lightly until her sobs faded into fragile breaths. Then the door flew open, and the nightmare for Brenda began. Elliot's tall frame filled the doorway as he pointed at her like an accusation. He looked disheveled, exhausted, and furious all at once. His tailored shirt wrinkled, tie loosened, and eyes bloodshot with weeks of sleepless nights. "What do you think you're doing?" he barked. "I told everyone the medical wing is restricted. You don't touch my children. Ever." Brenda's hands trembled as she turned toward him. "Sir, she was crying. I don't want your excuses." He cut her off sharply, stepping forward until he towered over her. "You are a housemaid, a cleaner. You follow orders. You don't get to make decisions about my daughters." I understand, sir, but she was terrified." "You dare talk back to me?" His voice rose again, sharper, colder. "The nurses know what to do. You don't belong anywhere near my girls. You hear me? What were you trying to do? Play hero? Impress someone?" Brenda flinched at the venom in his tone. "No, sir. I would never. You could have hurt her. You could have caused a panic attack or pulled her IV out. God knows what else," he snapped. "People like you always think kindness is enough to fix things. This is not a playground. This is life and death." Her breath hitched. "Mr. Graham, please. I only wanted to help." "You helped?" He laughed bitterly. "You almost made things worse. You're reckless and naive. I should fire you right now." Her knees nearly buckled. She clutched her apron with trembling fingers. "Sir, please don't. I need this job. I mean no harm." I heard her scream and I just instinctively— "Instincts don't matter here," Elliot barked. "Only rules do, and you broke them." Tears welled in Brenda's eyes. She bowed her head slightly, voice cracking. "I'm begging you. Don't send me away. I won't even step into the wing again unless you say so. Just please don't fire me. I need to be here." Her desperation only deepened Elliot's scowl. He turned away in disgust. "Mrs. Carter will decide whether you stay until morning. Get out of my sight." Brenda fled the room, swallowing sobs as she hurried down the hall. Behind her, Lila whimpered softly, but Brenda didn't dare look back. Alone again, Elliot exhaled shakily and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Anger still pulsed through him, mixing with anguish he refused to acknowledge. The last thing he needed was an untrained maid interfering with fragile medical routines, but something gnawed at him. Lila's scream hadn't sounded like pain. It had sounded like grief. Deep, soul-tearing grief. The kind he recognized all too well. He walked to his office, pulled up the security feed with quick, irritated keystrokes, intending to prove to himself, to the lingering whisper of guilt, that he'd been right. The footage loaded. The moment played back clearly. Lila thrashing, screaming for her mother, her voice cracking with terror. Brenda rushing in, not reckless, not careless, but steady, gentle, comforting. Her hands shook only with compassion, not incompetence. She stroked the girl's face, humming softly until Lila calmed, breathing against Brenda's shoulder like she had finally found a safe place in the storm. Elliot's chest tightened. The way Lila leaned into Brenda, the way Brenda whispered, "I've got you, sweetheart. I'm right here." The way the girl's trembling eased the moment she felt someone holding her. He swallowed hard. He hadn't held his daughters like that in months, maybe longer. The anger drained from him, leaving something heavier, more suffocating. Shame. He had misjudged her, badly. He replayed the footage twice, 3 times, lingering on Brenda's trembling hands as she soothed Lila, on her worried expression as the girl cried into her shoulder. She wasn't trying to break rules. She had simply cared, and he had humiliated her for it. Elliot leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. For the first time in a long time, the house around him felt painfully quiet. Too quiet. He opened his eyes again, staring at the screen as Brenda gently tucked Lila under the blanket, brushing a tear from her cheek. He hadn't seen anyone touch his daughters with tenderness since Elizabeth died. Elliot exhaled slowly, pressing a hand to his face. "I was wrong," he murmured to the empty room. It had been easier to yell, easier to blame, easier to push everyone away instead of facing the truth. He was terrified. Terrified of losing the last pieces of his family. Terrified of hoping again. Hope was dangerous, but tonight, as he watched Brenda on the screen, gentle, scared, compassionate, something shifted inside him. Maybe the danger wasn't hope at all. Maybe it was the walls he'd built around himself. And for the first time in months, Elliot Graham wished he had listened before he had shouted. If you've ever shut someone out because you were hurting, hit like, and comment where you're watching from. You never know who nearby might be watching with you. Brenda sat on the edge of her narrow bed, hands still trembling. Her uniform, damp with sweat, clung to her back. She had changed into it only hours ago, hopeful, determined to make a quiet difference. But now, after the fire and Mr. Graham's voice and the threat of dismissal hanging over her like a guillotine, that hope felt foolish. She hadn't meant to break any rules. She'd only reacted. A child had screamed, and she'd done what any mother would do. She went to her. But this wasn't a home. It was a place where children went to wait for the end, and no one wanted to be reminded of what was already being mourned. She clutched the small silver locket around her neck. Inside was the only photo she had left of Naomi, her daughter, 6 years old when she passed. The memory of that last night still lingered in Brenda's bones like winter air. Naomi had begged her to stay, and Brenda had held her hand until it went cold. Since then, Brenda had wandered through jobs, through grief, through silence, until Mrs. Carter called. "There's a family in Boston," she'd said. "They need help. Or maybe they just need someone to care." Brenda hadn't expected miracles. She just didn't want to watch another little girl die alone. A soft knock came at her door. Mrs. Carter stepped in, holding a cup of chamomile tea. Her graying hair was pinned up tight, and she moved with a graceful dignity carved from decades of quiet service. "He was angry," Brenda whispered, voice thin. Mrs. Carter handed her the cup and sat beside her. "Mr. Graham hasn't stepped foot in that room for more than 5 minutes in 6 months. Brenda looked down. "I didn't mean to break the rules. I heard her scream, and you did the right thing," Mrs. Carter said gently, even if he didn't see it. Yet, Brenda sipped the tea, its warmth settling in her chest. "He said people like me think kindness fixes things." Mrs. Carter smiled faintly. "It doesn't, but it helps people survive long enough to be fixed." The older woman stood. "Get some sleep. I'll speak with him in the morning." Brenda nodded, but sleep felt far away. In the darkness, she whispered, "Naomi, I don't know if I can stay here," but something deep within her answered back, "You must." Meanwhile, Elliot Graham stood alone in his study, watching the security footage one last time before shutting down the screen. His jaw was tight, hands balled into fists. Guilt chewed through him like acid. He wasn't used to being wrong, at least. Not about people. But Brenda hadn't been trying to overstep. She'd acted on instinct, and her instinct had been compassion. He had torn into her for doing the very thing he no longer knew how to do: comfort his own child. Elliot looked around the room that once belonged to Elizabeth. Her books were still on the shelf, untouched. A faint scent of her favorite lavender lotion lingered in the air. He hadn't had the courage to clear it out. Every corner of the house echoed with her absence. And now, with his daughters slipping away, he had walled himself off completely, living like a man waiting for the sentence to fall. Maybe Brenda didn't belong here, but maybe he didn't either. The next morning, Brenda rose before the sun, heart heavy but steady. She tucked the locket beneath her collar, tied her hair back, and walked quietly through the halls. She didn't expect to keep her job, but if this was her last day, she was going to spend it with the girls. The medical wing was still dim when she arrived. Lila slept soundly, curled on her side, cheeks pale but peaceful. Ivy's breathing was shallow but steady, her hand twitching slightly in a dream. Arya clutched a small stuffed rabbit with frayed ears. Brenda didn't touch them. She simply sat in the chair between the beds and began humming soft and slow. The same lullaby she had sung to Naomi on quiet nights, back when life had felt endless. She didn't hear the footsteps. Elliot stood just outside the doorway, watching. This time, he didn't bark orders or raise his voice. He saw her for what she was still, calm, a presence in the storm. His daughters hadn't smiled in months, hadn't slept through the night. And now, under Brenda's voice, they rested. He cleared his throat. Brenda jumped to her feet, almost knocking over the chair. "I'm sorry, sir. I'll leave." He held up a hand. "Stay." She froze, confused. He stepped into the room, looking at his daughters, then at her. "I reviewed the security footage," he said quietly. "I saw what happened last night." Brenda's lips parted slightly. A breath caught between fear and relief. "I overreacted," he admitted. "You didn't do anything wrong." She blinked, unsure how to respond. "I shouldn't have spoken to you that way," he added. "It wasn't about you. It was everything else." Brenda gave a cautious nod. "I understand." "No," he said, shaking his head. He glanced at the girls. "How did you get her to sleep?" Brenda smiled faintly. "I just treated her like a child, not a patient." Elliot looked at his daughters, really looked, and saw them not as diagnoses but as the little girls who used to run barefoot through the garden, who painted more on the walls than the canvas, who used to jump into bed with him when thunderstorms rattled the windows. He turned to Brenda. "Would you stay?" She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yes, Mr. Graham. I'll stay." He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, then stepped out. That night, the girls laughed for the first time in over a year. The nurses exchanged glances. The house seemed to breathe differently, as if it, too, had been holding its breath. And Brenda Jackson, once nearly thrown out, now walked those halls like a quiet storm of grace. The next morning arrived with a quiet the house hadn't felt in months, less like stillness, more like anticipation. Brenda walked into the medical wing promptly at 7 a.m., a fresh, lavender-scented candle tucked under her arm, a folded quilt draped over the other. The girls were still asleep, their tiny bodies sunken into the sterile hospital beds. Machines hummed gently, but even they seemed to take on a softer rhythm, as though responding to something invisible but real. She placed the candle near the window and lit it. The faint scent drifted into the air like a memory of spring. Then, with deliberate calm, Brenda stepped forward and did something no one had dared in months. She pulled back the blackout curtains. Golden morning light burst into the room. At first, it looked wrong. Foreign. The beams bounced off the polished floor and sterile chrome, illuminating every corner that had once been hidden by shadow. But then, something shifted. Lila stirred. Brenda walked over and sat gently beside her. "Morning, sweetheart." "Everyone." The little girl blinked up at her, squinting against the sunlight. "It's so bright. That's what mornings are supposed to be," Brenda whispered. Ivy stirred next. Her brow wrinkled as she lifted her head. "Why is it warm?" "It's the sun," Brenda smiled. "It still remembers how to find you." Arya didn't speak, but her eyes opened, wide and curious. She looked toward the window for a long time, then reached out her thin hand, as if trying to touch the golden air itself. Within minutes, the entire room felt different. Brenda moved between the beds, fluffing pillows, brushing the girls' cheeks with her warm palms, speaking to them like they were alive, not just surviving. Down the hall, Elliot heard something that made him freeze mid-step. Laughter, faint, fragile, but unmistakable. He turned instinctively toward the medical wing. As he approached, the laughter grew louder, accompanied by a badly sung rendition of "You Are My Sunshine." He reached the doorway just in time to see Brenda holding a hairbrush like a microphone, dramatically lip-syncing and missing every note on purpose. Lila was giggling, Ivy clapping softly, and even Arya's eyes twinkled with delight. For a moment, He didn't know if he was dreaming. Then Brenda noticed him. She froze mid-verse. "Good morning, Mr. Graham." Elliot didn't answer. His eyes moved from Brenda to his daughters. Their faces were still pale, still fragile, but alive, awake, engaged. He cleared his throat. "What are you doing?" Brenda lowered the brush. "We're having breakfast." The girls wanted music. "Music?" he echoed, his voice clipped. "They've been resting for months, Mr. Graham," Brenda said gently. "Maybe it's time they start living." He opened his mouth to argue, but Lila spoke first. "Daddy," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. Miss Brenda made us laugh. Elliot stared at her. She had spoken. A full sentence. He hadn't heard that in weeks. He turned without another word and walked away. Brenda didn't follow. She knew better than to chase a man still running from his grief. But that day, the house began to shift. Brenda kept returning every morning at 7. Never late, never loud. She opened windows, brought flowers, marigolds, and daisies from a small community garden she volunteered at on weekends. She brought jazz and Motown, lullabies and silly knock-knock jokes. She read books out loud while sitting cross-legged on the floor. She braided Lila's wig, painted Ivy's tiny fingernails, and helped Aria make a paper butterfly mobile. The nurses were baffled. The girls' appetites began to return. Their speech grew clearer. The monitors began reporting improvements no one could explain. One afternoon, Dr. Ashby, the new pediatric oncologist replacing Dr. Morrison temporarily, visited to check on the girls. After completing her exam in silence, she turned to Elliot with furrowed brows. "Their vitals are stabilizing," she said slowly. "Appetite, blood pressure, responsiveness. Even white blood cell count is showing slight elevation." Elliot narrowed his eyes. "Explain it." Dr. Ashby hesitated. "There's no new treatment, no changes in medication. I don't have an explanation." His gaze drifted to the open doorway, where Brenda stood folding soft blankets, humming under her breath. "Then whatever's happening," the doctor added, "don't stop it." That evening, Elliot sat alone in his office, the same medical reports strewn across his desk. The numbers on the page said one thing, but what he'd seen with his own eyes said another. A quiet strength, a stillness. Brenda was doing something no one else could. And she wasn't doing it with pills or machines. She was doing it with presence, with something he no longer knew how to give. A knock came at the door. He didn't look up. "Yes?" Brenda stepped in quietly, a tray of empty teacups in hand. She hesitated, then said softly, "I can collect them later if now's not a good time." He waved her in, voice low. "Leave them." As she turned to go, something made him speak. "Why are you doing this?" She paused. "Doing what?" He gestured vaguely toward the wing, the laughter, the music. "All of it." She turned to face him fully now, her tone measured but honest. "Because dying children don't need silence. They need someone who believes they're worth saving." His face hardened. "You know they're dying." Brenda's voice didn't waver. "It's not false hope, Mr. Graham. It's just hope. And sometimes, that's the only medicine that matters." She left him alone with those words echoing in the silence. And for the first time, Elliot didn't try to bury them. The next day, Elliot Graham found himself standing outside the medical wing again. He didn't plan to be there. His feet simply carried him, as if the house itself was guiding him toward the unfamiliar sound floating down the hallway. Soft voices, gentle laughter, the kind of sounds that had once filled his home before illness turned it into a mausoleum. He hesitated before pushing the door open a few inches. Inside, Brenda sat cross-legged on the floor between the 3 hospital beds. A coloring book lay open in front of her. Bright crayons scattered around like broken sunlight. Ivy was perched at the edge of her bed, gripping a purple crayon with renewed strength. Lila was sitting up, supported by pillows, watching Brenda's every gesture with fascinated eyes. Even Aria, the quietest of the 3, leaned forward to see what Brenda was drawing. "I know it looks like a potato," Brenda said, squinting dramatically at her sketch, "but I swear it's supposed to be a horse. It is cow today." The girls giggled. "A potato horse," Ivy corrected, grinning. "A potato unicorn," Leela added. Aria whispered, "With wings." Brenda gasped. A flying potato unicorn. Now that is a creature powerful enough to beat any nightmare. The girls erupted in laughter again, thin, delicate laughter, but laughter nonetheless. Elliot felt his chest tighten, as if his heart had suddenly remembered how to move after being locked in place for too long. He wanted to step inside, but he didn't move. He didn't know how to. Instead, the door creaked under his hand, and all four heads turned toward him. The laughter faded instantly, like sunlight slipping behind a cloud. "Good morning, Mr. Graham," Brenda said, her tone neutral but not cold. The girls exchanged quick glances, waiting for their father to scold her again, to demand silence, to return the room to the somber place it had been for months. But Elliot didn't raise his voice. He stepped inside awkwardly, clearing his throat. "I heard noise. I wanted to check." "It was us," Ivy said quietly, as if confessing to a crime. Elliot looked at her small, pale face, so fragile, yet so determined, and something inside him cracked. "It's all right," he said softly. 3 pairs of eyes widened. Brenda's gaze lowered to hide the surprise in her expression. "We were just coloring." He glanced at the paper. "A flying potato? Unicorn," Arya whispered. Elliot nodded once, the faintest ghost of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Very impressive. Brenda did not miss the shift. It was small, fragile, but real, a father trying to step back into the world he'd abandoned. She rose from the floor. "The girls wanted some fresh air today," she said carefully. "If it's all right with you, I can take them to the garden for a few minutes." Elliot stiffened. "Outside?" "Yes," she said gently. "The sun would do them good. It's dial their immune systems. I'll keep them wrapped and they won't touch anything," she assured. 10 minutes, just sunlight. Lila looked up at him. "Please, Daddy?" Her voice, weak but hopeful, was what undid him. He nodded. 10 minutes. The girls cheered softly. Brenda wasted no time. She rolled their lightweight wheelchairs into the room, helped each girl settle in, wrapped them meticulously in blankets, adjusting the IV poles to move along with the chairs. Elliot followed them down the hall, not sure if he was escorting them or protecting himself from the anxiety their outing stirred. The double doors to the garden opened with a gust of crisp autumn air. Leaves rustled overhead, and sunlight spilled across the stone path like warm honey. Brenda wheeled the girls into the middle of the garden and positioned them in a small circle so they could see each other. She knelt beside them, pointing at the turning leaves. "Look," she whispered. "The maple trees are changing. Nature's way of saying nothing stays dark forever." The girls watched in awe. Ivy closed her eyes, letting the breeze brush against her cheeks. "It smells nice out here." "That's fresh air," Brenda said, smiling. "Something machines can't make." Lila pointed at a squirrel darting across the grass. "Daddy, look." Elliot followed her finger. Yes. He hadn't looked at a squirrel in years, not since the days when the girls used to chase them with handfuls of carrots. Arya reached out a small hand toward him. He froze, then stepped closer. She curled her fingers around his, her grip soft but certain. "It's beautiful," she whispered. For a moment, Elliot didn't know whether she meant the garden or the moment itself. Brenda watched quietly from behind, letting them have their space. After 10 minutes, Elliot cleared his throat. "We should take them back inside." Brenda nodded. Of course, but the shift had already happened. Something had taken root, a tiny seed of trust, or at least the beginning of one. Back inside, after the girls were returned to their beds and settled, Brenda collected the blankets. As she worked, Elliot lingered near the door, unsure if he should speak. Finally, he said, "Thank you." Brenda turned, stunned. It was the first gentle thing he had said to her. "For what, sir?" "For..." He struggled. Vulnerability was not his native language. "For whatever you did out there." "I didn't do anything," she replied softly. "The sun did." "No," he said. "You did." Before he could say more, a nurse entered with medication, and Elliot stepped back into the hall. He didn't leave immediately. For a while, he simply stood there, listening to his daughter's soft voices drifting out of the room. Brenda's voice joined them, steady, warm, anchoring. Elliot ran a hand over his face. He wasn't ready to admit it yet, But he was beginning to need her here, and that terrified him. Elliot Graham hadn't meant to linger outside the medical wing again, but there he was, standing just out of view, hands tucked in the pockets of his cashmere robe, pretending he wasn't listening to the sounds that now came regularly from the room that once echoed with silence. Laughter. Again, it had started as a whisper, just a flicker of joy on the edge of a breath, but now it was unmistakable low giggles, soft jokes, and the occasional snort of childish amusement. It was absurd how foreign it sounded inside his own home. For months, he'd grown used to the beeping of machines, the hum of IVs, the gentle shuffle of nurses avoiding eye contact. But this laughter, it made the walls breathe again. He didn't understand it. He wasn't even sure he trusted it. But he kept coming back, like an addict needing one more hit of something he'd sworn he didn't need. Inside the room, Brenda had created a kind of magic. There were no fairy lights or banners, no toys or extravagant gifts, just a small radio softly playing jazz standards from the 40 seconds, 3 sets of coloring books, and a woman who sat like she belonged, not as a guest, not as a caretaker, but as a presence. She was reading a story aloud, her voice animated, slipping into different characters. It wasn't a famous book, just a simple tale about a garden that refused to bloom until a little girl whispered to the soil every day. The flower didn't believe it was meant to live, Brenda said gently, turning the page. Until someone told it they believed in it. Lila hugged her knees, listening with wide eyes. Ivy laid her cheek on the pillow, smiling faintly. Arya, who rarely spoke, whispered. What color was the flower? Brenda looked up, caught off guard by the question. I think, maybe it was all the colors. A rainbow flower. Because it had to be brave in every way. Elliot closed his eyes for a moment. That voice, that story, that warmth. He opened them again and walked away before anyone noticed. Down the hall, in his office, he tried to work. Tried to return emails, tried to review quarterly reports. Tried to reclaim the role he used to live in so easily. CEO, investor, builder of empires, but the numbers blurred. He stood and walked over to the window. From here, he could see the garden, the one Brenda had taken the girls to the day before. He hadn't stepped foot out there in over a year. Not since Elizabeth's funeral, not since the last time the girls had danced in the grass. He pressed a hand to the cold glass. They had looked so small in those chairs, wrapped in blankets, fragile and luminous, like candle flames in the wind. And yet, they had been smiling. He didn't know what scared him more, the fact that it was happening, or the fact that he wasn't part of it. Later that afternoon, Brenda stood in the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel when Mrs. Carter entered. Need a break, dear? The older woman asked, eyeing her kindly. Brenda smiled, exhaustion tugging at her features. I'm fine. Just trying to make a list. Of? Party supplies. Mrs. Carter blinked. For what party? Brenda turned. The girls turned 7 in 10 days. The room fell quiet. Mrs. Carter's face softened with sadness. Brenda, you know what the doctors said. I know, Brenda said gently. But they don't. Mrs. Carter sighed. Honey, I've buried too many little ones in this house to get excited about cake and candles. I'm not planning it for us, Brenda replied. I'm planning it for them, because hope needs something to look forward to. Behind them, a low voice cut through the air. For children who might not live to see it? Brenda turned slowly. Elliot stood in the doorway, arms folded. His tone was sharp, but not as cutting as it once was. More tired than angry. Yes, Brenda said calmly. His jaw clenched. You think that's kind? Giving them a party when they might not make it another week? No, Mr. Graham, she said softly. What's cruel is treating them like they're already gone. He stepped forward, anger flaring. You don't know what this is like. He did. Brenda didn't flinch. I do. His eyes narrowed. Really? You've had to plan a future you knew was never coming. You've had to watch your own child fade while you sat helpless beside her bed. Brenda's voice cracked. Just a little. Yes. The silence that followed felt like it cracked through the foundation of the room. Elliot blinked. Brenda swallowed hard. 5 years ago. My daughter, Naomi. Leukemia. I was there for every chemo session, every blood transfusion. I held her hand until the very end. Elliot's voice faltered. I didn't know. No one does. Because I don't talk about it. I show up. I fight for the ones who are still here. Because I couldn't save her. But I can give these girls something she never had, one more good day. He stood there, caught in the gravity of her words. She didn't ask for his permission. She walked past him, pulled a notebook from the counter, and began writing again. Balloons, streamers, vanilla extract, rainbow candles. She would pay for it all herself if she had to. He watched her for a long moment, then turned and walked out. But that night, as he sat in his office and looked down at the photo of his daughters when they were babies wrapped in matching pink blankets, Elizabeth beaming beside him, he felt something break loose in his chest. A memory, a grief, a longing, and underneath it all, a question he hadn't dared ask in months. What if they made it? Snow began to fall over Boston. It started softly, dusting the hedges along the Graham estate and covering the back garden in a smooth, untouched layer of white. By evening, the wind picked up, and the snowfall turned dense, sweeping across the windows like whispers from another world. The estate grew quieter than usual, nurses moving faster, voices lower, a quiet sense of preparation humming under every movement. Brenda stood by the window in the girls' room, watching the storm swirl under the outdoor lights. The triplets were asleep, their monitors pulsing softly in rhythm. Lila clutched a worn plush bear. Ivy breathed through parted lips, and Arya, always the lightest sleeper, opened her eyes the moment Brenda moved away from the window. "Is it morning?" she asked softly. Brenda walked over, tucking the blanket tighter around her. "Not yet. Just the snow, saying hello." Arya gave a sleepy smile. "Can we go out tomorrow?" Brenda hesitated. "We'll see how strong you're feeling." "I am." Arya nodded once, satisfied with the maybe, and closed her eyes again. Brenda sat in the chair between the beds and pulled out her knitting, something simple, something quiet. A small blue square slowly formed in her lap, her hands moving on instinct, though her mind wandered. She didn't like storms. Not anymore. Naomi had passed on a stormy night like this, fever spiking, breath slowing, the world outside muffled under snow while everything inside her had broken apart. Brenda blinked back the memory. Not tonight. Down the hall, Elliot paced. He didn't do well with helplessness, and the storm, powerful, unpredictable, reminded him how fragile everything was. The generator had kicked in twice already, humming through the walls. Cell signal was spotty, the landline barely usable. Dr. Ashby had called earlier to warn him that if anything happened tonight, help might not arrive in time. He had nodded through the conversation, said all the right things, but inside, panic had already started its slow crawl through his chest. He walked to the window and watched the snow devour the garden, the same place where, just days ago, his daughters had laughed under Brenda's care. He hadn't known how to re-enter their world. But now he feared it might be too late if he didn't try. At midnight, Arya woke up gasping. Brenda was at her side instantly, placing a hand to her forehead. It burned under her palm. "Elliot!" she shouted, the name slipping from her lips before she realized it. A moment later, he burst through the door, shirt wrinkled, eyes wide. "What's wrong?" "She's burning up. Fever just hit hard." Brenda's voice stayed calm, but her hands were already moving, pulling wet cloths, adjusting her IV. "Her breathing's off. We need to cool her." He grabbed a thermometer. "No signal. I can't call the doctor." "I know," Brenda said, her voice clipped with urgency. "Help me, Izo." Together, they worked changing cloths, checking pulses, adjusting the monitors. But Arya's fever climbed higher. Her chest began to rise and fall in erratic gasps. Her lips tinged with blue. Brenda's hands shook. Elliot froze. "What do we do?" Brenda leaned over Arya, feeling for her pulse again. Then the monitor flatlined. "No," Elliot's voice cracked. "No, no, no." Brenda shoved him aside gently, but firmly, and immediately started chest compressions. "Stay with me, baby girl. Come on, come back." Elliot dropped to his knees, hands gripping Arya's small hand, his forehead pressed to her blanket. "Please, please." Don't take her too. Please take me instead. Brenda's voice broke. Not again. Not again. Her hands kept moving compressions, counting, breath, compressions. Naomi. She whispered, then caught herself, tears spilling. Arya, stay with me, sweetheart. Come back. 1 minute passed. 2. Elliot sobbed into his hands. Ivy had woken and was crying softly in her bed. Lila clutched her bear, frozen in place, whispering her sister's name, then a cough, a small, weak cough. The monitor beeped once, then again. Arya's chest rose slowly, her eyes fluttering open. Daddy? Elliot choked. I'm here. I'm right here. He scooped her into his arms, shaking with the weight of it all. You're here. You came back. Brenda collapsed into the chair, her hands still shaking, her heart racing. Elliot looked at her through tear-blurred eyes. You called her Naomi. Brenda covered her mouth with her hand, stunned. He stepped closer. Who was Naomi? She exhaled slowly, painfully. My daughter. 5 years ago. Leukemia. She was 6. Elliot's breath caught. Oh, God. I held her just like this, Brenda said, eyes fixed on Arya, but she didn't come back. I promised her that night. I wouldn't let another child feel alone in the fight. I see. Elliot reached out and gently took Brenda's hand. For once, he didn't care about rules or appearances. You kept that promise, he whispered. You saved her. Brenda couldn't speak. She only nodded, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. They stood there in the dim light of the storm, Arya breathing steadily now between them. And in that fragile, holy moment, 2 broken parents, one who had lost, one who feared losing, stood side by side, understanding something deeper than words. That healing wasn't just for the dying, it was for the living who had forgotten how to live. Morning broke with pale light filtering through the snow-covered windows, turning every room in the Graham estate into a scene from a postcard, soft, quiet, and frozen in time. But inside the walls, something had begun to thaw. Arya was resting peacefully. Her fever had dropped after the night's terrifying ordeal. Ivy and Lila clung to her like she might vanish again if they blinked too long. Brenda stayed nearby, keeping her touch gentle and her voice even. Every now and then, she would glance at Elliot, as if to make sure he was still there too. He was. He hadn't left the medical wing since the moment Arya came back. In the past, Elliot would have retreated, let the staff take over while he drowned himself in financial projections and silence. But now, he stood beside his daughters like a man realizing just how close he came to losing everything. By mid-afternoon, Brenda suggested a change of scenery. If the girls are up to it, maybe we could try the dining room? Just for lunch? Elliot looked uncertain. They haven't eaten in there since. He didn't need to finish. Brenda nodded gently. I know, but sometimes, facing ghosts is the only way to stop being haunted. He hesitated, then glanced at the girls. Ivy gave a tiny nod. Lila whispered, Can we? Arya smiled faintly. Only if Daddy comes too. Elliot swallowed hard. All right. The dining room was cavernous, cold in the way that only wealth and grief could create. The chandelier overhead hadn't been lit in months. Dust had settled on the edges of the long oak table. It still bore the marks of happier times, scratches from toy cars, faded juice stains. A crayon line that someone had forgotten to wipe off. Brenda arrived first, opening the curtains wide. Light spilled across the table. She laid out soft placemats, arranged soup bowls, added cloth napkins in warm colors. Nothing elaborate, just human. Mrs. Carter brought out a tray of grilled cheese and tomato soup, the kind of meal the girls could actually enjoy. Comfort food for a day that still trembled with memory. When Elliot wheeled the girls in, the silence was thick. Brenda greeted each girl with a smile and helped them settle into their seats. She gave Elliot a subtle nod as he slid into the head of the table, the seat he hadn't occupied since Elizabeth passed. He looked down the length of the table at his daughters, their fragile faces illuminated by winter light. Before we eat, Brenda said gently, can we say one thing we're thankful for today? The girls looked at each other. I'm thankful for Arya coming back, Ivy whispered. I'm thankful we're not in bed, Lila added. Brenda turned to Arya. The little girl grinned. I'm thankful for grilled cheese. Brenda chuckled. That's fair. Elliot didn't speak. He stared at his plate, hands clenched. Brenda sat beside him and spoke quietly, just for him. You don't have to say anything. Just being here is enough. He glanced at her, eyes full of something more than grief, shame, maybe. Or guilt. She used to sit right there, he said, nodding at the empty chair to his right. Elizabeth. She'd make pancakes in the shape of animals and laugh when they burned. Even when we had 5-star chefs in the kitchen, she'd still cook Sunday breakfast. Just for them. Brenda said nothing. She let the silence speak. He looked at the girls. After she died, I thought, keeping everything the same would preserve her. Like, if we didn't sit here again, we could pretend she was still around. But all I did was freeze them with her. Brenda reached across the table and gently touched his wrist. It's okay to start again, she said. Not over. Just again. He looked at her hand, then up at his daughter's. He picked up his spoon. The girls followed. And for the first time in nearly a year, the Graham family shared a meal. It was quiet. It was slow. It was imperfect, but it was a beginning. That night, Elliot sat alone in the family room, a fire crackling in the hearth. The photo albums were stacked on the floor around him, dusty and forgotten until now. He opened the first one. There was Elizabeth, holding newborn Arya, her face glowing despite the hospital gown. Next came a page with the triplets in matching yellow onesies. Elliot in a tuxedo, his tie crooked because Lila had pulled it during the family portrait. He flipped page after page, tracing a life he hadn't dared look at in over a year. Then footsteps. Brenda appeared in the doorway, hesitant. I didn't mean to interrupt. You're not, he said, closing the album. I just wanted to remember the sound of her laugh. Brenda stepped into the room. You don't have to look at pictures alone. He gestured to the armchair across from him. Sit. She did. For a moment, they said nothing. Then Brenda broke the silence. You know, Arya asked me today why no one plays the piano anymore. Elliot's head snapped up. She remembers that? She said her mommy used to play it in the afternoons. He nodded slowly. Chopin. Every Thursday. That was her day. Brenda stood and crossed the room to the baby grand tucked in the corner. Its cover was coated in a thin layer of dust. She opened it, and without asking, she pressed a single key. Then another. The notes hung in the air, familiar and raw. You play? He asked. She smiled faintly, enough to remember what it sounds like to feel. She began to play not Chopin, but something soft, something made of memory and hope, stitched together with grief. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Elliot leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, listening. For the first time since the funeral, he let himself miss her, let the ache move through him without resistance. When the final note faded, Brenda sat in silence, letting the room absorb the music, and Elliot Graham whispered something he hadn't said in a long time. Thank you. It began with a whisper. Not the kind spoken from lips, but the soft sort of suggestion that seems to come from the house itself. Brenda had always believed that old homes held memory the way trees hold, rings, quiet, hidden, but real. The Graham estate, with its endless hallways and untouched wings, had too many locked doors and too many stories sealed behind them, and one of those doors was about to open. It started when Arya, now stronger after the fever scare, asked Brenda during story time, "Why doesn't Daddy ever go into the red hallway?" Brenda blinked. What hallway? Arya pointed toward the east wing, the one with the creaky floor and the dusty pictures. He walks past it, but never goes in. IMZ. Ivy chimed in. I asked once and he said it was for another time. Lila added in a whisper. Sometimes at night, I think I hear music coming from there. Brenda frowned. Music? The girls nodded in eerie unison. That evening, after the girls fell asleep, Brenda lingered outside the medical wing. Her footsteps led her down the hall and toward the east corridor. It was darker than the rest of the house, with tall windows covered in thick velvet drapes. Portraits lined the walls, ancestors, likely, all with cold eyes and stiff expressions. The air smelled faintly of cedar and forgotten time, and halfway down, she found the door. Unmarked, dusty, closed tight. She laid a hand on the knob and hesitated. You shouldn't be here. Brenda spun around. Elliot stood at the end of the hall, arms crossed, his voice firm, but not angry. I didn't mean to pry, Brenda said, stepping back. He approached slowly, his eyes not leaving hers. It's not you I'm worried about. That room, it's complicated. Brenda tilted her head. Because of her? Elliot didn't answer. Instead, he moved past her and opened the door. The hinges groaned. Inside, the room was dim, lit only by the gray dusk filtering through sheer curtains. It was a music room, or it had once been. A grand piano stood in the center, draped in a silk cloth. Bookshelves lined the walls. There were stacks of sheet music. A single teacup, long dried and cracked with age, sat beside a faded scarf on a side table. Brenda stepped in behind him. It's beautiful. She loved this place, Elliot said quietly. Elizabeth. This was her sanctuary. She played here every evening while the girls napped. Even when things got bad, she'd still play. Brenda ran her fingers along the edge of the piano. Why lock it away? Elliot swallowed. Because when she died, I couldn't bear to hear silence in here, and I couldn't bear to hear anyone else try to fill it. They stood in silence for a while. Then Brenda did something bold. She walked to the piano, pulled back the cloth, and opened the lid. She didn't ask permission this time. She didn't need to. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The melody was gentle, an old hymn that hummed of sorrow and light. Elliot didn't move. He stood frozen, breath shallow, memories crashing into him like waves. He saw Elizabeth, saw her long fingers dancing across those same keys, heard the laughter from the hallway as the girls tried to sneak in and press random notes, remembered falling asleep on the couch as music spilled down the corridor like a lullaby. Brenda's playing slowed. She looked up at him. You can't keep grief behind a door forever, she said gently. Sometimes you have to let it out, or it becomes something else. He didn't answer, but something in his face softened just a fraction. Then, to her surprise, he walked past her, reached for a folder of sheet music, and handed it to her. She loved this piece, he said. Elizabeth wrote in the margins, always argued with herself about how to end the second stanza. Brenda smiled and began again this time, with the music Elizabeth once loved. And in that room, long shut away, Elliot let himself remember love without breaking. The next morning, Brenda noticed something odd. On the kitchen table was a list written in elegant, slanted script. Lemon curd, wildflowers, soft white candles, Elizabeth's favorite record. Brenda raised an eyebrow. Mrs. Carter entered behind her. That wasn't there last night. Brenda ran her fingers across the handwriting. It's Elliot's. Mrs. Carter smiled. Or maybe it's his way of saying she's still part of this. Brenda looked at the list again. It felt like an invitation. Later that day, she returned to the girls' room and told them about the music room. Can we see it? Ivy asked, eyes bright. I think, Brenda said, it's time you did. That evening, Elliot met them at the doorway to the red hallway. The girls were bundled in blankets, their eyes wide with excitement and reverence. He didn't say much. He simply opened the door again. Brenda wheeled them inside one by one, and for the first time since Elizabeth's passing, the music room was filled with voices, small, warm, alive. Lila reached for a tambourine. Arya traced her fingers along the ivory keys. Ivy pointed to a photo on the shelf. That's her, isn't it, Mommy? Elliot nodded. Yes. They all sat together on the floor, and Brenda played while the girls hummed. And Elliot, seated beside his daughters, began to hum too. Softly, almost afraid, but he did, because in that room of ghosts, there was something more powerful than memory. There was music. And where there's music, there's life. Snow still clung to the eaves of the Graham estate, but the air inside was warm, buzzing with an energy the house hadn't held in over a year. Streamers fluttered gently above doorways. Balloons, soft pastels, and sparkly silvers lined the staircases. A small cake sat on the kitchen counter, blanketed in whipped frosting and dotted with 7 tiny rainbow candles. And in the center of it all stood Brenda, adjusting the ribbon on Arya's dress, her hands gentle, eyes bright with a strange mix of joy and worry. The girls were turning 7 today. A birthday no doctor thought they'd live to see. But here they were alive, fragile, radiant. "Do I look like a flower?" Lila asked, twirling in her wheelchair, her dress spinning out like petals. Brenda laughed. "You look like a whole garden." I was nodded. "I feel dizzy," Ivy whispered, and Brenda immediately knelt beside her. "You want to lie down, baby?" Ivy shook her head. "No. I want to see the cake." "You will," Brenda promised, brushing the hair from her forehead. "Just let me know if it gets too much." "All right?" Arya, quiet as ever, clutched her teddy bear in one hand and looked around the room. Mommy always said birthdays were for celebrating miracles. Brenda's breath caught. Elliot, standing just inside the doorway, heard that too. "She was right," he said softly. The girls looked up. Their father had changed, not just in posture or tone, but in presence. He no longer stood on the edge of their lives. Now, he was seated in the center of them. He approached with a small box in his hand, wrapped in silver paper. "I know we usually go big," he said, kneeling beside Arya. "But this year, I thought we'd keep it simple." He handed the box to Arya, who passed it to Ivy, who passed it to Lila, until all 3 pairs of hands were on it. Inside were 3 lockets, each one engraved with the girls' initials, each holding a photo of their mother on one side, and the 3 of them as newborns on the other. Lila's eyes filled with tears. "Is this real?" Elliot nodded. "Your mother had them made before she passed. She wanted to give them to you when you turned 7. Brenda gasped quietly. He looked at her. "I almost forgot." They were locked away. Until last night. There was silence for a moment. Then Brenda whispered, "She believed in this day." Elliot smiled. "She did, even when I didn't." The celebration was small. Brenda lit the candles while the girls sang a shaky but determined version of Happy Birthday. Ivy blew them out with help from Arya. Lila clapped with both hands, her joy uncontained. Mrs. Carter served the cake, wiping her eyes with the corner of her apron more than once. Elliot didn't look at his phone once. Instead, he sat between his daughters, cutting tiny pieces of cake and letting frosting smear his cufflinks. He watched them laugh, smile, even cough. Watched them live. Brenda brought out handmade paper crowns. "They're not gold," she said, "but they sparkle." "I love it," Arya whispered, placing hers gently on her head. Brenda smiled, kneeling beside her. "You are the bravest girl I know." Arya leaned forward and kissed her cheek. "Thank you for being here," she said. Brenda froze. Then she nodded, her eyes stinging. "Always." Later that night, after the girls had returned to their beds, worn out but happy, Elliot and Brenda found themselves in the living room, sharing a cup of tea. "She would have loved this," he said quietly. Brenda looked up. "Elizabeth," he clarified. "This house used to glow when she was in it. I thought it died when she did. But tonight, it felt alive again." 32 nighted. Brenda held her cup with both hands. "Because of them. And you," he added, voice low. "You brought something back I thought was gone." She shook her head. "They brought it back themselves. I just held the light until they could find it." He studied her for a long moment. There was no pretension in Brenda, no savior complex, just a quiet, stubborn refusal to give up on children everyone else had already mourned. "I'm sorry," he said suddenly. Brenda blinked. "For what?" "For how I treated you when you first came. I was cruel, unfair, and wrong." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Grief makes us do strange things. I never blamed you." He looked down at his hands. "Still, you deserved better." "I didn't come for kindness," she said. "I came for them." He met her gaze, something unspoken between them. "And now?" Brenda smiled, just faintly. "Now I stay for them." Elliot nodded. And then, very quietly, he said, "I hope someday you might stay for me too." She didn't answer, but she didn't look away. Upstairs, in the soft glow of nightlights, the girls slept soundly, wearing paper crowns and silver lockets. Their breathing was steady, peaceful. Outside, the storm had passed. The snow had stopped, and inside the house that once held only grief, hope moved quietly, like a fire catching in the hearth. The morning sun spilled over the Graham estate like a slow exhale, chasing away the shadows of so many long nights. The storm had passed completely now, leaving the world outside dusted in white and strangely calm. It was the kind of peace that felt earned. Downstairs, the house stirred awake slowly. Brenda moved through the kitchen with practiced grace, preparing oatmeal the way the girls liked, just enough brown sugar to sweeten it, but not so much the nurses would raise an eyebrow. She hummed quietly, an old gospel tune her grandmother used to sing. Elliot entered the room without announcing himself. No tie, no phone in hand. Just him, present, grounded, more like a father than a CEO. "You're up early," Brenda said, not looking back. "Couldn't sleep," he admitted. "The quiet's too loud." Brenda poured coffee into 2 mugs, handed one to him. "Maybe that's the sound of healing," she said. He took the cup. "Or guilt." She paused, then turned to face him. "You still blaming yourself for being human?" He half smiled. "Every day." Before either of them could say more, Mrs. Carter entered the kitchen, holding something in her hand. "This came by courier," she said, a bit breathless. "Addressed to Mr. Graham. But I think you'll both want to see this." She handed him a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. The handwriting unmistakably feminine. Elegant. Familiar. Elliot's face paled. He took the letter slowly. Eyes locked on the name written across the front in blue ink. Elliot. "Elizabeth," he whispered. Brenda stepped closer. "Is that her handwriting?" He nodded, already opening it with trembling fingers. A folded sheet slid out. The paper was delicate. Brenda could feel the history in it. Elliot cleared his throat and began to read aloud. "My dearest Elliot, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you in the way we had planned. First, I want to tell you, I forgive you. Whatever guilt you carry, whatever anger you feel for not doing enough, let it go. You were there. In all the ways that mattered. I knew I was loved. Second, the girls will need you. Not the man who built empires, not the name on hospital wings. They need the man who sang lullabies off-key and fell asleep holding 3 bottles at once. You were always their anchor, even when you didn't see it. And if you're struggling to find your way back to them, look for the light. I promise someone will come along to help you hold it again. With love forever, Elizabeth." The room was silent. Brenda had tears in her eyes, but she didn't speak. Elliot read the letter again silently, slower this time, like he was letting the words settle into places long shut off. "She knew," he said finally. "She knew I'd get lost." Brenda reached out and touched the edge of the letter. "She also knew you'd come back." He looked at her, something raw and open in his gaze. "Do you believe in fate, Brenda?" She gave a soft laugh. "I believe in grace. And second chances." He studied her for a long moment, then folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope, setting it on the counter like it was sacred. "There's something I want to show you," he said. He led her upstairs to the master bedroom. She hesitated at the threshold until now. It had been off limits, not out of rudeness, but out of grief. It was Elizabeth's room, and therefore untouched. But today, Elliot opened the door. Inside, the room was immaculate. A canopy bed draped in white linens, a fireplace now cold, and tall windows facing the east garden. But the most striking part was the collection of journals stacked neatly on a bookshelf by the window. "She wrote every day," he said, walking to them. "Every dream, every fear, every small moment with the girls. After she died, I couldn't bring myself to read them." He picked up one and handed it to Brenda. "Would you?" Brenda took the journal, heart pounding. She opened to a random page. Aria hummed today. Just a little tune, barely there. But it was music. Real music. She may not speak much, but she feels everything. And Ivy so gentle, always making sure her sisters have what they need. And Lila, bold and bright, that child will change the world if I can just keep her here long enough. Is doing that? Brenda's voice trembled. She saw them for who they really are. Elliot nodded. She never gave up hope, neither did you. Brenda wanted to say, but instead she simply looked out the window. Snow had begun to melt from the hedges, revealing the tips of spring bulbs pushing through. Elliot joined her by the glass. "Do you ever feel like the right people walk into our lives exactly when we need them?" She smiled. "I feel like the girls saved me as much as I've helped them." 99. He turned to her. "I don't want to keep pretending I can do this alone. Not anymore." Brenda didn't answer right away, but she didn't leave either. Instead, she reached for another journal. "Then, let's read together." That night, in the girls' room, Brenda told them about the letter from their mother. She said she loved you very much, and she knew you'd be brave. Arya smiled. She was right. Ivy looked up. "Will we see her again?" Brenda didn't lie. "I don't know, but I do know she sees you now." Lila touched the locket around her neck. "I think she lives in here." Elliot entered the room, listening. He sat on the edge of Ivy's bed. "You know what else your mom said?" The girls turned to him. "She said someone would come to help us find our way back to each other." They looked at Brenda. "She meant you," Arya said, grinning. Brenda smiled, and for the first time in a long time, the girls fell asleep without nightmares. Outside, the moon hung low and kind, and somewhere between the pages of old journals and new beginnings, the future began to breathe again. It was a Tuesday morning when Brenda first noticed it, a faint, acrid scent hanging in the air like a warning too soft to be real. She paused in the hallway, just outside the girls' room, her nose crinkling. It wasn't strong enough to cause alarm. Not yet. It reminded her of burnt toast or an old wood stove left unchecked, but it was out of place. The Graham estate was too meticulously maintained, too quiet, too cold. Still, something felt off. She dismissed it for the moment and pushed open the girls' door. The triplets were coloring at the table Brenda had set up beside their beds. Ivy was carefully shading in a sunset. Lila was drawing herself as a superhero. Arya, as always, was doodling in circles, repetitive, but calming. "Good morning, my brave girls," Brenda said, her voice light. "Smells like Mrs. Carter is burning breakfast again." Lila giggled. "She says it's just a crisp edge. I think it's charcoal art." Ivy replied with mock seriousness. Brenda smiled, but her mind lingered on the scent. Downstairs, the smell had thickened. Mrs. Carter stood near the oven, fanning smoke with a dish towel, clearly frustrated. "This old range acts up every time it storms," she muttered. "I swear the wiring's got a ghost in it." Brenda checked the stovetop. One burner glowed faintly even though the knob was off. She turned it hard until it clicked. The glow disappeared. "Maybe it's time for an electrician," Brenda suggested. Mrs. Carter nodded. "Been telling Mr. Graham for months. But you know, one thing or another." Brenda's brows furrowed. "I'll mention it." She left the kitchen, the scent still ghosting the air, weaving between wallpaper and crown molding like something with a will of its own. That afternoon, Brenda helped Elliot clean out the last few boxes in Elizabeth's old music room. The journals had been moved to the study for safekeeping. Now, only photos, faded sheet music, and a few of Elizabeth's scarves remained. Brenda held one up to the light lavender with tiny embroidered stars. She had elegant taste. "She used to wear that when she played Debussy," Elliot said, his voice soft. "Said it made the music feel lighter." Du Frive. He reached out to take it from her, but as he did, a sharp wince crossed his face. "You all right?" Brenda asked quickly. He waved her off. "Just a headache. Been coming and going the past few days. Have you been sleeping?" "Not really," Brenda sighed. "That'll do it." He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. She watched him a moment longer. There was something heavier in his posture lately, like he was waiting for a shoe to drop. "What is it?" she asked gently. Elliot hesitated. "There's a board meeting coming up. Some of the partners aren't happy with how long I've been away. They've started making noise." Brenda's chest tightened. "They want to replace you?" "Not yet, but they've mentioned a vote." "And what would that mean? For you? For the girls?" Elliot looked away. "If I lose control, the estate becomes a financial asset. My decisions, especially about the girls' care, could be overridden." Brenda blinked. "They'd move them?" "To a facility," he said bitterly. "One of the ones that made Elizabeth cry just thinking about." Brenda's hands clenched. "We can't let that happen. We won't." Elliot said, but the quiet crack in his voice betrayed the weight of his fear. That night, Brenda couldn't sleep. She kept replaying Elliot's words in her mind. The thought of the girls, those 3 fragile flames being snuffed out in a sterile, loveless facility, made her stomach turn. She wandered the halls, restless, and then she smelled it again. Smoke, thicker this time. She turned the corner toward the east wing and stopped short. A wisp of black haze curled from under the door to the storage room. Her heart seized. She bolted forward, yanked open the door, and was hit with a cloud of smoke. Not flames, not yet, but something was smoldering. An old electric heater plugged into the wall, tipped sideways, had ignited a box of linen tablecloths. She grabbed the fire extinguisher from the hall, yanked the pin, and sprayed, coughing through the haze. Within seconds, the smoke began to settle. Footsteps thundered behind her. Elliot, shirtless, panicked, clutching a flashlight. "What happened?" Brenda pointed, wheezing. "Old heater. Caught fire." He helped her to her feet, guiding her into the hallway. She coughed again, eyes watering. "You could have been hurt." She waved a hand. "I'm all right. I will do." He looked past her, into the scorched storage room. "That thing's been in there since my father lived here," he muttered. "I didn't even know it still worked." Brenda met his eyes. "Someone could have died tonight." He didn't reply, but the weight of her words hung between them. The next day, electricians arrived. Elliot had made the call himself before sunrise, his voice cold and direct. By noon, half the estate's wiring was being inspected, outlets tested, old heating units removed. Brenda watched him move through the house, commanding, focused, precise. But later, she found him in Elizabeth's old room, sitting on the floor beside a stack of photo albums. "I almost lost it all again," he said without looking up. "You didn't," she replied softly. He turned to her, something fragile in his face. "It's like the house is fighting back, or I am." Brenda sat beside him. "You're not fighting, you're remembering. And sometimes, that hurts more than forgetting." Red into oven, they sat in silence, side by side. After a while, Elliot whispered, "Do you think I'm a good father?" Brenda didn't rush to answer. Then she said, "I think you're becoming one, and that matters more than being perfect." He exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing, and somewhere deep inside the estate, the scent of smoke finally cleared. It began with a question from Ivy. "Daddy," she said, pointing to an old painting hanging at the top of the grand staircase. "Who's that man?" Elliot froze mid-step. Brenda paused behind him, her hands on Aria's wheelchair. Lila tilted her head, squinting at the portrait. The man was stern, dressed in a gray 3-piece suit with a gold pocket watch and hard eyes that didn't quite meet yours. No matter where you stood. The plaque beneath it read, "Richard Graham II, 1923, 1991. Elliot cleared his throat. "That's my grandfather." "He looks mean," Lila muttered. Elliot didn't disagree. "He was a hard man," he said finally. "Built the family's fortune during the Depression. Believed strength came from silence. And fear." "Did you love him?" Ivy asked, without guile. Elliot took a breath. "No. But I respected him. At least, I used to." Brenda glanced at him, sensing something else. Later that evening, when the girls were asleep and the house had settled into its nighttime quiet, Brenda found Elliot in the study, standing in front of the same portrait, drink in hand. She entered silently, waiting. "He used to sit me down right there," Elliot said, nodding at the leather chair behind the desk. "Made me memorize stock prices and oil futures before I turned 12, he said. Soft men build nothing." Brenda crossed her arms. "And yet here you are raising 3 daughters with softer hands than he ever had." Elliot chuckled, bitter. He'd roll in his grave. "Let him," Brenda replied. Elliot looked at her, then back at the portrait. "There's a reason I never brought the girls in here. I didn't want them to feel like this house belonged to him." Brenda moved to his side. "Then maybe it's time to reclaim it." The next morning, Brenda suggested a family art day. The girls lit up with excitement. "We could make paintings," Aria offered shyly. "Of what?" Ivy asked. "Anything," Brenda said. "Anything you want this house to remember." They set up canvases in the sunroom. Light streamed in through the tall windows as brushes danced over color. Aria painted the grand piano, covered in stars. Ivy painted the garden in bloom, each flower labeled with a name: Mommy, Brenda, Daddy, Lila, Aria, Ivy. Lila painted herself flying above the estate in a superhero cape, her wheelchair transformed into a rocket. Elliot stood in the doorway, silent at first, then walked over and picked up a brush. "Are you gonna paint, Daddy?" Lila asked. He nodded. "Yeah, I think I will." His strokes were slower, more unsure but intentional. He painted a sunrise, simple, honest. By the end of the afternoon, the room was filled with wet canvases and laughter. That evening, Brenda returned to the study and found the portrait of Richard Graham II gone. In its place, a blank wall. Elliot entered behind her, holding Ivy's painting. "I thought this belonged here more," he said. Brenda stepped aside, watching as he hung it up gently. The room changed instantly, less cold, less heavy. "Thank you," she said. He shook his head. "No, Brenda, thank you." But peace never lingers long in a house with secrets. Later that week, a letter arrived. It was delivered by hand, the envelope thick and cream-colored, bearing the crest of the Graham Family Trust. Elliot opened it in front of Brenda, eyes scanning fast. "They've scheduled the vote," he muttered. Brenda's stomach turned. "When?" "Next Friday. They've called a full board meeting at the New York office." Brenda read the rest over his shoulder. Motion: to determine whether Elliot Graham is still fit to act as guardian and executor over all family holdings, including the care and financial provision for his children. "It's my own blood questioning whether I should raise my daughters," Elliot said, barely containing his fury. Brenda steadied her voice. "Then, let's remind them what a father looks like." He turned to her. "Will you come with me?" Brenda hesitated. "I'll need someone who doesn't just see the numbers, but the truth. Someone who knows what these girls have been through, what I've become." Brenda nodded slowly. "I'll be there." He didn't thank her aloud, but the look in his eyes said enough. That night, Brenda couldn't sleep. She stood by the window in her room, watching snow begin to fall again, quiet and unhurried. Somewhere deep inside, a storm had begun to stir, but it wasn't fear. It was resolve. They had healed so much, but the world outside this house was about to test whether that healing could hold. The Graham jet sliced through the clouds on a sharp winter morning, the skyline of Manhattan glittering in the distance like a kingdom waiting to be conquered or taken away. Brenda sat stiffly in the leather seat across from Elliot, her palms damp despite the plush comfort around her. She had never been on a private jet before. But today wasn't about luxury. It was about war. And this boardroom they were flying into wasn't just a corporate formality, it was a battlefield. One where the enemy wore polished shoes, smiled politely, and used words like fiduciary concern and optics to mask cruelty. Elliot reviewed a dossier in his lap, filled with projections, legal notes, and media statements. But it wasn't the numbers that weighed on him, it was the photo tucked in the folder's flap. A candid shot of the triplets in the garden, Lila laughing in her chair, Ivy watching butterflies, Aria holding a paintbrush twice her size. He stared at it like a lifeline. "You sure about this?" he asked Brenda without looking up. She met his gaze across the aisle. "I've never been more sure of anything." He gave a small nod, as if bracing for a wave he knew was coming. The boardroom sat on the 53rd floor of the Graham building. Glass walls surrounding a long table of hardened men and women in tailored suits. A few of them stood as Elliot entered, more out of habit than respect. At the head of the table sat Richard Graham III, Elliot's cousin. 45, sharp-featured, and hungry. He wore ambition like cologne. "Elliot," Richard said, standing. "Glad you could make it. Save it." Elliot replied coldly. "Let's get this over with." Brenda walked in behind him. Heads turned. Whispers stirred. Richard's eyes narrowed at her presence but said nothing. Elliot introduced her. "This is Brenda Hollis. She's my daughter's caregiver, and she's here at my request." "Noted," Richard said with a tight smile. "Though this meeting is for trustees only." "She's not here to vote," Elliot replied. "She's here to speak. You'll listen." Richard gestured to a seat. "Fine, let's proceed." The first 30 minutes were brutal. Charts, spreadsheets, carefully curated emails, each designed to paint Elliot as distracted, unstable, and unfit to lead. One trustee even questioned the estate's recent expenditures on non-medical staff and therapy items. "You used to sign off every acquisition personally," one woman noted. "Now you've approved art supplies and piano tuners?" Elliot didn't flinch. "Because my daughters are alive. And healing." Richard stood. "The trust must act in the best interest of the legacy. That includes ensuring the children are placed where their medical needs are prioritized, and if I may, professionally supervised." Brenda stood then, calm, steady. "May I speak?" The room shifted. Richard waved his hand condescendingly. "If you must." Brenda stepped forward. Her voice was clear, low, and unshakably calm. "You speak of legacy," she began, "but I've held it in my hands. I've wiped its tears at 2 a.m. I've held it through seizures, through surgeries, through panic attacks when they couldn't breathe. Legacy? Legacy is knowing the smell of your daughter's hair when she finally feels safe. It's knowing which song calms her down when the meds stop working." She took a breath. "I watched those girls go from silently surviving to living. And they did it not because of a sterile facility. They did it because someone finally chose love over protocol. A father who came back from grief, who didn't give up." Silence. Even Richard hesitated. Then Brenda leaned forward slightly. "And if you vote to take that away, you're not saving a legacy. You're killing what's left of it." One of the older board members cleared his throat. "Miss Hollis, what's your relationship to the children?" "I'm their caregiver," Brenda replied. "But I'm also the person who sees them. Not just their charts." Another member leaned in. "You'd stay with them regardless of the vote?" Brenda looked at Elliot. Then back to the table. "Yes, even if I have to fight." The board recessed for private deliberation. Brenda and Elliot sat in the hall, quiet. "I've never seen them that silent," he said finally. Brenda looked at him. They weren't expecting someone to speak with a heartbeat. He gave a short laugh. Then the door opened. Richard stood in the doorway, tight-lipped. "We've reached a decision." Back inside, the tension was unbearable. Richard addressed the room. The vote was close. He turned to Elliot. "But the board has decided, by a margin of 1, that you will retain your position as executor and guardian, with full oversight remaining in your name." Brenda exhaled sharply. Elliot didn't react. Not right away. Then he looked at Brenda. "Let's go home." Back on the jet, Brenda stared out the window as the skyline faded behind them. "I thought you'd be more relieved," she said softly. "I am," Elliot said. "But now I know something else." "What?" "How fast they'll try again." Brenda looked at him. "Then we stay ready." Elliot reached into his pocket and handed her the photo again, the girls in the garden. "I kept this close today, just in case I forgot why I fight." Brenda studied the image, smiled. "You didn't forget," she said. "No," Elliot replied. "Because you reminded me." Ard. The plane banked gently westward, carrying them back to the 3 little girls waiting with paper crowns and second chances. The Graham estate stood quiet as the car pulled up to the front drive. Snow crunched beneath the tires. And above, the sky hung heavy with clouds that didn't quite know whether they'd cry, rain, or snow. There was something restless in the wind. Brenda stepped out first, her boots pressing into the packed frost. The front door flew open, and before she could even knock, the triplets came barreling forward in their wheelchairs and walkers, escorted by Mrs. Carter and one of the nurses. "Daddy!" Ivy shouted. "You're back," cried Lila, waving both arms. Aria didn't say anything, but the way she reached for Brenda spoke volumes. Brenda dropped to her knees as Aria's small arms wrapped tightly around her. "I missed you too, baby," she whispered. Elliot knelt beside them, drawing all 3 girls into his embrace. "We won," he said softly. "They tried to take you away, but we didn't let them. You were our hero," Ivy said proudly. Brenda looked at him over their heads. For the first time in days, she saw his eyes fully open. No dread, no hesitation, just presence. Strength. The next few days passed in a soft, bright blur. Elliot doubled down on being present. He joined Brenda and the girls during morning therapy. He read with Ivy by the fireplace. helped Arya mix colors for her newest painting, and held Lila's hand while she told him all about how she planned to become the first wheelchair-bound astronaut who also painted. And yet, beneath the joy, Brenda noticed something strange. The estate's power flickered at odd times, once in the middle of breakfast, then again late at night while she was doing laundry. The lights snapped off and then surged back with a flickering hum. She brought it up with Elliot. "I thought the electricians handled all that," she said one morning. "They did," he replied, frowning. "They rewired the east wing, replaced all the old fuses. Then why is the breaker tripping?" Elliot paused. "I'll check the box again," but his voice carried doubt. That afternoon, Brenda was organizing some of the girls' winter clothes in the linen closet near the medical wing when she noticed something else: thin black marks on the wall near one of the outlets. She touched the drywall. Warm. Too warm. Her stomach dropped. She ran to the basement. The breaker box, normally closed, was hanging ajar. Inside, 2 of the circuit lines had been tampered with. Exposed wires curled like veins, and 1 switch had been held in place with cheap tape. Brenda stepped back, heart racing. Someone had deliberately sabotaged it. She brought Elliot down 10 minutes later. He stared at the mess, silent for several seconds. "This wasn't an accident," Brenda said. "No," he agreed. This was meant to cause a fire. But why? Who would?" Elliot stood suddenly, jaw tight. "Richard." Brenda's eyes widened. "You think he?" He knew if anything happened to this house, especially if it endangered the girls, it would reopen the vote. "Make me look negligent." "But that's criminal," Brenda whispered. Elliot turned to her. "He doesn't care. Legacy is everything to him. And he sees the girls as liabilities." He slammed the box shut. "We need security cameras. Full coverage. Every hallway, every exit, every system checked by someone I trust." "And the police?" Brenda asked. "Not yet," he said quietly. "We make the call when we have proof." That night, Brenda barely slept. Every creak in the house felt sharper. Every sound carried weight. And worse, so did every shadow. At 2:13 a.m., she heard it, the unmistakable click of the back door latch. She grabbed her phone and crept from her room. Down the hall, past the stairwell, toward the kitchen. The door was ajar. Cold air slipped in through the crack. She stepped outside. Snowflakes fluttered down like ash. But there, just at the edge of the garden path, footprints. Fresh. Leading away from the house and toward the old greenhouse. She followed. Inside the glass structure, frost laced the windows. Broken pots and rusted tools lay scattered. But in the corner, barely hidden, was a small pile of wires, rags, and an old space heater, the same type that had nearly started a fire weeks ago. And atop the pile, a lighter, gold-plated, engraved with the initials RG3. Brenda picked it up, her fingers trembling. They had their proof. Back inside, Elliot stared at the lighter like it had bitten him. "He didn't even try to hide it," he muttered. "He wanted us to find it. Or he thought we wouldn't." Brenda's voice was steady. "This changes everything. You have to go to the police." "I will," Elliot said. "First thing tomorrow." But Brenda's eyes were still on the window, because outside, the wind was rising. The storm wasn't done. It had just changed shape. And somewhere out there, someone was watching. The next morning broke with ice on the windows and a tension so thick it hung in the hallways like fog. The house, usually filled with the gentle chaos of children and the hum of daily care, was silent. Elliot had left for the police station just before dawn. The gold-plated lighter zipped into a sealed evidence bag. Brenda watched him from the window, his coat collar turned up against the wind, his shoulders tight with anger and purpose. She stayed behind, partly to protect the girls, partly because the weight of what they'd uncovered still hadn't fully landed. Arson, attempted harm, by a family member, and the terrifying truth: they weren't safe. Not yet. Brenda moved through the estate like a sentinel. She checked every door, every window latch, every hallway light. Then she helped Arya with her morning medications, tied Ivy's curls into soft braids, and helped Lila adjust the brace on her leg. The girls sensed something was different. "Is Daddy okay?" Arya asked, her small voice uncertain. "He's all right, sweetheart," Brenda replied, smoothing a hand over her head. He's just making sure we stay safe. Lila frowned. Is there another storm coming? Brenda hesitated. Yes, she said honestly, but we're ready for it. By noon, Elliot returned. His face was unreadable. Brenda met him in the front hall. Well? She asked. They're opening an investigation, he said. The lighter links to Richard, but it's circumstantial. They're requesting security footage and witness statements. It's a start, but not enough to charge him yet. Brenda's jaw tightened. So he gets to walk free? For now, Elliot said. But he's under scrutiny. And I hired a private security team. They'll be here by tonight. Brenda exhaled. Good. He stepped closer. They'll keep watch. But it's you they trust. Brenda looked up. What do you mean? Elliot took a breath. The girls, the staff, even me. We trust you. You're not just their caretaker anymore. She blinked, unsure what to say. You're part of this family, he continued. And I think Elizabeth would have wanted that. It was the first time he'd said it that plainly. Brenda swallowed hard. Thank you. No. Elliot said. Thank you. For not walking away. That afternoon, the estate's security team arrived. A mix of quiet professionals, 2 men, 1 woman. All former law enforcement. Brenda led them through the house, showing entry points, blind spots, power boxes, and even the secret back staircase behind the pantry that most people forgot existed. This place is a fortress, one of them murmured. Not enough, Brenda replied. Not until he's gone. The head of the team nodded. We'll stay on site, 24 hours. If anyone so much as breathes wrong near this house, we'll know. Still, Brenda couldn't shake the chill in her chest. Richard Graham III wasn't done. People like him didn't retreat. They recalculated. That evening, after the girls were asleep and the new security detail had taken their posts around the perimeter, Elliot poured 2 cups of tea and joined Brenda on the back porch. It was cold, but quiet. Stars blinked above the treetops. I remember when this porch was her favorite place, Elliot said. Elizabeth. She used to sit here with a blanket and a book. Said it made her feel like time stopped. I do. Brenda looked out over the snow-covered grounds. It's hard to imagine peace lasting here, but it has to, he said. For them. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box. Brenda blinked. What's that? He opened it slowly. Inside, a locket, like the ones the girls wore. But this one had no initials yet, just a place for 2 photos. I was going to give this to Elizabeth, he said. When we found out about the girls, I had 4 made, but I never gave her this one. Where Cashnally was a ricking est. Brenda's breath caught. Elliot looked at her. I don't know what the future holds, but if this house survives, if we survive, I want you to have it. She didn't move, didn't reach for the box. Instead, she whispered, Elliot, I came here for a job. I know, he said. And you gave a family its heart back. Tears stung her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Not yet. She reached for the locket and clasped it shut in her palm. That night, as the stars disappeared behind heavy clouds and the wind began to howl, a different kind of storm approached. Not fire, not snow, but something far more dangerous. Intent. From the darkness beyond the estate, eyes watched, waited, and planned. Because Richard Graham III had just lost control of everything, and he wasn't done fighting. The call came at 3:07 a.m. Elliot shot up in bed, heart pounding. His phone buzzed again, an unknown number. For a moment, he froze. Then he answered, his voice hoarse. This is Elliot Graham. A beat of silence. Then, a man's voice distorted, calm, and bone cold. Still think you've won? Elliot sat straight. Who is this? But he already knew. You can lock your doors, hire your little guards. But you can't bury blood, Elliot. Legacy doesn't die in the cold, it waits. It watches. And it strikes when you think you're safe. Click. The line went dead. Elliot didn't hesitate. He was already moving. Within minutes, the estate was lit, the security team summoned, and Brenda awakened by the knock on her door. She met him in the hallway, robe tied tightly. What happened? He handed her the phone. he called. Brenda's face went pale. Richard? He knows we've locked down, and he's still coming. They reviewed the footage from the night. 3 different exterior cameras showed a man tall, hooded, standing just beyond the gate sensors at 2:54 a.m. Not moving. Not entering. Just standing. Watching. Then, without a word, he walked away. Taunting us, Brenda muttered. Trying to scare us into making a mistake. Elliot nodded grimly. He wants us to feel hunted. Then we do the opposite. She said. We don't hide. We don't fold. We show him what a real family looks like when it stands together. But even as she said it, Brenda couldn't deny the tension rising in her gut. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was personal. That morning, she focused on the girls like nothing had happened. Leela worked on her book of superhero dreams. Ivy helped Arya arrange her paints. Brenda sat between them, humming softly, pretending her eyes weren't scanning the windows every 5 minutes. But the girls noticed. Is something wrong? Ivy asked. Brenda paused. There are people out there who don't want us to be together, but we're not going to let them win. Do we need to fight? Lila asked. Brenda smiled. No, we just need to stay strong. That's what scares them most. Elliot spent the afternoon in the estate's legal room, reviewing every document, every clause in the trust. His lawyer, a thin man named Dobson with half-moon glasses, had been summoned from New York. Technically, Dobson said, adjusting his tie, the estate belongs to you until the girls come of age. But any act of gross negligence can trigger a revote from the board. And if Richard causes the negligence? Elliot asked. That's the gray area. Without criminal charges, his fingerprints stay clean. We need surveillance, witnesses, paper trails. We have motive, Brenda said from across the room. Is that not enough? Not in courts like these, Dobson said. In courts like these, it's your word and your willpower. That night, Brenda walked the perimeter with one of the guards, Mendez, a quiet woman in her 50s who carried a Glock like a purse and had eyes like steel. You ever dealt with someone like this before? Brenda asked. Mendez nodded. Narcissists with money? Plenty. What stops them? Mendez didn't miss a beat. Someone who doesn't blink first. But blinking wasn't the problem, because that night, Richard didn't play shadow games. At 11:43 p.m., the gate alarm went off. Brenda was in the nursery with Arya when it buzzed through her earpiece. Gate 1. Breach detected. She ran. Downstairs, the guards swarmed the camera feeds. A car had rammed the outer gate. Not enough to enter, but enough to bend it. Elliot stood behind them, fists clenched. License plate? Mendez zoomed in. Obscured. Looks like a rental. Another voice chimed in. No movement inside the vehicle. Then the back door buzzed. Gate 2. Motion detected. Brenda's heart dropped. He's trying to split us up, she said. Elliot nodded. You stay with the girls. I'll check the basement. Brenda hesitated. No. We stay together. Raginist. They moved through the house like a unit. Brenda, Elliot, Mendez, and 2 guards. The storm outside had begun again. Wind howling through the trees. Ice tapped at the windows like fingernails. They found nothing in the basement, but in the hallway outside the girls' room, something had changed. A photo frame had been moved, a family portrait of Elizabeth, Elliot, and the triplets. The frame was cracked, tilted slightly. Brenda stepped forward. Behind the frame, pinned to the wall with a thumbtack, was a single piece of paper. On it, typed in bold font, "You can't protect them forever." Mendez swept the house again. The security team sealed every entrance. The girls were moved temporarily to the master suite, with guards stationed outside the door. Elliot stared at the paper like it was acid. He got in. Brenda took a breath. He's showing us he can. Elliot leaned against the wall, rubbing his eyes. I thought I could win this by playing fair. You can't, Brenda said. Not with men like him. He looked at her, worn and desperate. Then, what do we do? She straightened. We outlast him. Elliot narrowed his eyes. And if he forces our hand? Brenda's voice was steel. Then we take the gloves off. Later that night, Brenda sat at the girl's bedside while Elliot met with a former federal agent Dobson had recommended. The wind outside beat against the windows. The house creaked, but inside, she kept her face calm, because fear was what he wanted, and tonight, he wouldn't get it. Arya stirred in her sleep. "Brenda," she whispered. "I'm here, baby. Are we safe?" Brenda looked down at her, brushing hair from her forehead. "We are now." But in her chest, she felt it. The storm had fully arrived. By morning, the estate was on high alert. Extra guards were brought in. Motion sensors rechecked. Every hallway, every blind spot, every door and window was mapped and monitored. It looked less like a home now and more like a command center. Wires tucked behind picture frames and security feeds running in the kitchen. Brenda stood with Elliot in the upstairs library, which had now become their situation room. Whale. On the table in front of them, the printed threat note, screenshots of Richard's car from the gate footage, a map of the estate with red-circled points of entry and a list of every member on the Graham Family Trust Board. "They need to see this," Brenda said, tapping the threat note. "They need to understand that keeping Richard in their circle makes them complicit." Elliot rubbed his temples. "Some of them don't care. As long as the money flows, then we make them care." It was nodded. He looked at her, eyes narrowed. "How?" Brenda leaned in, voice low. "We bring the girls into the light." Later that day, Brenda set up her phone on a tripod in the sunroom. Natural light flooded the room where the triplets sat, surrounded by their paintings and favorite stuffed animals. Elliot knelt behind the camera, unsure. "They don't like being recorded." "They won't be recorded," Brenda said. "They'll be seen." When Ivy began describing how much better she could sleep now, when Arya showed her paintings with shaking fingers, when Lila declared that Brenda was like a superhero who forgot her cape, Elliot couldn't breathe for a moment. They weren't actors. They weren't rehearsed. They were just real. Brenda's voice came from behind the camera. "What would happen if you had to leave the house?" The room went still. Then Ivy whispered, "I'd forget how to feel safe." They was honest. The video was sent anonymously to every member of the Graham Trust. Brenda and Elliot didn't sign it. They didn't have to. The next morning, Dobson called. "You just swung the heart of the board." That night, Elliot sat with the girls in their playroom while Brenda folded laundry in the next room. The scent of cinnamon tea lingered in the air. For the first time in weeks, there was something close to peace. But peace never lasts. The alarm screamed at 11:09 p.m. Brenda bolted from bed. Her earpiece buzzed. Fire detected. West Wing. Kitchen corridor. She raced down the stairs, nearly colliding with Mendez. The smoke detectors wailed now, shrill and panicked. But there was no smoke, no heat, only diversion. Mendez barked. "Check the east side." Elliot had already grabbed the girls, lifting Lila while Ivy pushed Arya's wheelchair. Brenda threw open the panic room door they'd installed 2 weeks prior, hidden behind a bookshelf in the library. "Go!" she shouted. "Inside." Elliot ushered them in. "Brenda, go." The door sealed shut. She turned and ran. In the east wing, she found the window near Elizabeth's old room shattered. A man stood there, tall, masked, black clothes, moving with trained precision. Brenda didn't scream, didn't flinch. She grabbed the fire poker from the hallway stand. "Wrong house," she said. The man lunged. They collided hard, Brenda's shoulder cracking against the wall. He grabbed at her wrist. She slammed the poker into his ribs, once, twice. He cursed, stumbling back, but she saw it. The chain around his neck. A gold ring. Not just any ring. The Graham crest. He ran. She gave chase. Through the servants' corridor. Down the back stairs. She caught the edge of his coat as he reached the garage, but he elbowed her hard, sending her to the ground. And then he was gone. Police arrived minutes later. Sirens howled down the drive. Forensics moved quickly, but Brenda sat in the hallway outside the girls' room, knees drawn to her chest, hands shaking. Elliot found her there. "You saved them," he said. She looked up, dazed. It was him, or someone working for him. "I saw the ring." Elliot didn't speak. He sat beside her. Then he whispered, "They're never going to stop, are they?" Brenda took a breath. "No, but neither will we." At dawn, Richard Graham III was arrested. Not for the break-in, there wasn't enough proof yet, but for evidence tampering, trust violations, and a long-buried fraud case that had quietly resurfaced thanks to Dobson's relentless digging. The news broke across headlines. Graham family divided. Internal sabotage exposed. Richard's mugshot went viral, but the estate stayed quiet. Brenda stood on the back porch, watching the sun rise over the trees. Elliot joined her, arms crossed. "Do you think it's over?" he asked. Brenda shook her head. "I think it's just beginning. But the worst part?" She looked toward the house, where the girls still slept peacefully. "It didn't break us." "No," Elliot agreed. "It forged us. And somewhere in the frozen ground, beneath the roots of legacy, something new had begun to grow. Spring came early. The snow melted in sheets, revealing green beneath gray. Trees budded with cautious color, and for the first time in years, laughter rang through the estate's halls, without fear echoing behind it. The court officially stripped Richard Graham III of all rights to the family trust. He pled not guilty but accepted a quiet plea deal that required him to leave the state, surrender voting shares, and live a life far removed from the empire he tried to steal. Public disgrace had never looked so dignified until the world saw through it. The girls would never know the full extent of what had happened, but they would remember the peace that followed. Brenda stood in the garden beside Arya, helping her plant a new row of tulips. Ivy chased a butterfly with a net too big for her small hands. Lila, ever the fearless one, had turned her wheelchair into a flower cart, ferrying soil bags like a race driver with a mission. Elliot watched from the porch, coffee in hand, eyes soft. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was earned. That afternoon, the staff gathered in the main parlor. Elliot had called a family meeting. Mrs. Carter was there. The housekeepers, Mendez and the security crew, the therapists, even Dobson, the old lawyer, showed up, his cane tapping rhythmically on the marble floor. Brenda stood near the fireplace, unsure why she was even in the room until Elliot spoke. "I built this house to keep people out," he said. "High walls, long drive, security everywhere." He looked at Brenda. "But real safety comes from people who choose you. People who stay when it's hard, who speak up when silence is easier, who hold children when they cry, and who fight beside you when you're scared." He took something from his pocket, the locket. Brenda's hand flew to her chest, her own locket still nestled there. Elliot turned the second one over. The back had been engraved now. "Family is not blood, it's who shows up." He held it out. "This was meant for someone I loved," he said. "Now I know exactly who it belongs to." Brenda didn't move for a second. Then she stepped forward and took it. Her hands trembled. But not from fear, from belonging. That evening, Brenda sat with the girls on the front steps. The sky blushed pink. The wind carried the smell of earth and lilacs. "Is it really over?" Ivy asked. Brenda wrapped an arm around her. "It's never really over, baby. Life keeps going. But we're stronger now." Lila leaned against her side. "You're staying forever, right?" Brenda looked at them, three little girls, once lost, now blooming in the soil of a house that had finally remembered how to be a home. "Yes," she said, her voice firm. "Forever, if you'll have me." They piled onto her in a giggling embrace. Later, Elliot joined her on the swing bench under the old oak tree. "I can't pay you enough for what you've done," he said. Brenda smiled. "Good. Because I'm not staying for the money." They sat in silence for a while. Then Brenda spoke softly. "You know what your grandfather got wrong?" Elliot turned. "What?" He thought legacy was built in boardrooms and banks. But real legacy. She nodded toward the window, where Arya painted a smiling sun. "It's built in moments like that." Elliot nodded, and in that quiet, with spring lifting the weight of winter, they understood each other completely. Not as employer and caretaker, but as something deeper. Family. The wind moved through the estate's halls gently now, no longer restless, no longer cold. The house, once ruled by ghosts and fear, now breathed with new life art on the walls, laughter echoing in corners once silent, and a rhythm that felt like love, finally winning. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it would endure. Because someone had once said, "You can't protect them forever." But Brenda Hollis had proven something even stronger. You can choose to stand, every day. And that choice? That's what saves a family. This story reminds us that true family is not defined by blood, but by loyalty, courage, and the willingness to protect what truly matters. In a world where power and legacy often overshadow love, it's the quiet acts of compassion, the midnight comforts, the steadfast presence, the voice that stands up when others stay silent, that build a home. Brenda didn't just care for the children, she stood between them and the darkness. And in doing so, she taught us that justice isn't always loud, but it is always brave.